So this is a quick tutorial on how to create a fashion illustration in Adobe Photoshop using gradients. So you should have generated your black and white line drawing. You can do that either in Photoshop or scan a line drawing that you've created manually by hand, and it will appear as layer 1. The first thing you want to do is rename the layer because you're going to be creating quite a few layers. So I'm going to name this one line drawing. So this illustration is made up of skin, hair, dungarees and a t-shirt. So I'm going to create a series of layers by clicking on create new layer, which is like the little post-it note at the bottom. Then I'm going to double click and I'm going to rename that layer as skin. I'm going to create another layer and I'm going to rename this layer as hair. Create another layer and rename this layer as dungarees, and finally t-shirt. So the reason for doing this is because you are going to flood each of these sections independently as opposed to flooding them all on one layer. That will give you the opportunity then to switch certain layers off to get different outcomes of illustrations. So your line drawing layer is the layer that you'll be putting active when you're selecting various aspects of the illustration. So you know it's active because it turns grey. Here the skin layer is active, so it's turned grey. So I'm just going to make sure I'm on the line drawing layer. The key thing to remember is to always have an eye on what layer you're active on, because what you don't want to do is accidentally work on a layer that you shouldn't be working on. So always have an eye down here at what layer you're actually working on. So now I'm on my line drawing layer. This is the layer that only has something on it at the moment, which is the line drawing. And I'm going to come up here to my magic wand tool and I'm going to select the dungarees as the first section. So if your magic wand tool isn't visible, what it might be is it might be hidden behind. So you just need to press and hold, and that will give you the options of what else sits behind that button. So my magic wand is active. I'm going to come down and I'm going to select the dungarees. So as long as your drawing is fully enclosed, it will select all areas within that section. And as you can see, there's running ants running around there. If when you've selected you find that it's not quite the right area you wanted to select, simple fix to get rid of the running ants, to deselect, is Control and D on a PC or Command and D on a Mac. So now you can see my running ants have disappeared. I can now select this area. So now I've selected the area on the line drawing layer, I want to actually start flood filling it now. What I've got to make sure I do is select the area I want to flood fill on. So I'm flood filling the dungarees, so I'm going to select the dungaree layer to flood fill on. My ants are still active. So next I'm going to come over to my colour swatches and I'm going to mix the colours that I want the dungarees to be. So you're going to be working in a gradient, so you're going to mix the foreground colour and then you're going to mix a background colour. So I'm going to click on the foreground colour, and let's say these dungarees are purple. So I'm going to say the shade of dungarees is here, okay? And then I'm going to mix a darker version of that purple. So to do that, I'm going to click on the background layer. I'm then going to use the colour picker. You can see it's automatically changed to a colour picker tool. And I'm going to click on my purple, and it's selecting the exact same shade of purple that is my foreground colour. Obviously I don't want the exact same shade, I want a darker version of it to look like shadow. So I'm just dragging my spot down so it's a little bit darker, and I'm going to say OK. Down here you can see I have a light purple and a darker purple. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find the gradient tool, which is here. Again, this might be sat behind something else, so you just need to press and hold. It might be your paint bucket is the visible button, or it might be the 3D one. So you just need to make sure that you select the gradient tool. And then it automatically defaults to this type of gradient, which is from dark to light. So this works for me because I'm going to be doing a gradient fill around these dungarees. So what happens is you click and you drag and release. So depending on where you started and where you finished is where the light to dark goes, and how long you drag the line will depend on how much shadow and how much light you have. So you can see here from what I've done, the shades I've mixed, there's not too much of a contrast. So what I might do is I might make my background more prominent so it's a little bit clearer. And then I'm going to drag, and you can see there we're getting a real light shade. So depending on what angle I drag on is where the shadow runs, and how long I drag for is how much shadow and light we get. So I'm going to leave it at that, running round to there. So I'm now done here. Next I want to choose the next section of my dungarees. So I can't simply use the magic wand tool because there's nothing else on the dungaree layer. The only thing that's sitting on my dungaree layer is this section of colour here. So I need to go back down to my line drawing, select my line drawing layer and click my next section of dungarees. I'm then going to go back up to the dungaree layer because I'm about to fill. I'm going to select my gradient tool and then I'm going to drag and create some shadow. I'm going to run the shadow the other way, and there you have it. So you just keep repeating this exercise. I'm going to go back to my line drawing layer, select the area of the line drawing layer using the magic wand, then go back to the dungaree layer to actually flood the colour. Use the gradient tool, drag and add the gradients. Then I'm going to go back to my line drawing layer, pick up my magic wand, select my next section for filling, go back to my dungaree layer, pick up my gradient tool and flood the gradient within there. And you literally just keep repeating that exercise. The key thing to remember is to make sure you're switching between your layers. What you don't want to do is start flooding on the line drawing layer, because then when you want to switch the line drawing layer off, it will switch off all your colour that you flooded on there. So the reason for doing this on separate layers is because you can create interesting effects like this. You might want to print an illustration with the black lines on, you might want to print one with the black lines off to get different effects. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at flooding the skin colour. So rather than trying to mix a skin colour tone in your colour palette, a quick and simple way of doing this is to pick up a skin palette from the internet. So if you go to Safari and you type in skin tone palette, go to images and you will find hundreds and hundreds of skin tone palettes. So it's always handy to keep one of these saved because you never know when you might need it. So you just need to find one that's got lots of colours that you can choose from. I'm going to go for this one, and then you just save the image. This one I'm going to save as skin tones. Save. So next I'm going to open that skin tones layer whilst I'm in Photoshop. So I'm going to go File, Open, and then I dropped it on my desktop, so I should be able to find skin tones here. Open. And there we have it. So it's sitting on another tab on my active screen. So what you can do now is I'm going to pick up one of these skin tone colours. I'm going to switch my palette to this one here, and I'm going to say OK. And then I'm going to set my background colour, there, and I'm going to take this a tone darker for creating shadow. And I'm going to switch back to my illustration, and what you'll find is what I set in my swatch tab is still there. So as I flick back and forth, these don't particularly change. The only thing that changes is your layers. So I now have my skin tones set. I'm going to come down to my line drawing layer, pick up my magic wand, and I'm going to select my skin section. I'm then going to go onto my skin layer. I'm going to pick up my gradient tool and I'm going to drag and fill the skin tone. So at the moment we're looking at a banding of gradient colour that goes from dark to light, but what you'll notice up here is you've got the options to change the way your gradient works. So you can have a radial gradient, you can have sort of like this harsh angle gradient, you can have a reflected gradient, which works quite well if you're trying to do something like a full round arm or a pair of trousers. And then you can also have this sort of gradient that goes light in the middle to dark edges in a diamond shape. So I'm going to pick up this reflected gradient and I'm going to see how this works on my arm here. So that's quite nice, it gives the impression of an arm with a little bit of light and sheen to it. So you just literally continue this exercise for each section, remembering every time to go from line drawing to layer, from line drawing to the layer. So I'm going to next pick up my running ants and I'm going to select the skin of her face. I'm going to go on to my skin layer. I'm going to select my gradient tool and I'm probably going to go with this sort of radial effect of gradient. And I'm going to drag, there we go, and mix the colour in that way. So sometimes it's worth playing around to see which gives you the best effect. And you literally continue the exercise like this, step by step by step. If at any point when your magic wand's selected, which I think will happen on this hair, here, yeah, you'll find that your running ants have selected the entire illustration. This is because there's a break somewhere in this hair outline, and it's not just selecting the inside of the hair, it's selecting the inside and running out to the illustration. So all you simply need to do is Control and D or Command and D to get rid of the ants. Zoom in a little bit on the illustration and have a look if you can see where the break is. If you've done the illustration by hand, you've probably been quite accurate, but sometimes on Photoshop you can miss little gaps. So sometimes it's worth picking up your pen, which sits behind your paintbrush, pencil tool, changing this to black, and actually changing the nib size a touch as well here. Ooh, a little bit big. And then actually redrawing in the outline. Actually that is a little bit bigger. Step back and go down a smaller size. Actually redrawing the outline if you find you've got sort of faint layers and it's not picking up what you want. And then you just continue in that way. Once you've filled the entire illustration, what's quite nice is to have a look at it in its different forms. So you might want to switch off your line drawing layer. You might want to do the illustration switching off the hair or the skin and just having the garments. But it's quite nice to have a look at it and how it looks in its different layers. And that's basically it. Just make sure you do a file and save.